They told her, before she ever crossed my threshold, that I was a monster. I know this because I heard it myself, standing in the shadow of the gallery stair while the housekeeper walked the new companion up from the hall. Mrs. Pryor had a carrying whisper, the kind that thinks itself discreet and is not, and she spent it freely on the girl beside her. His Grace does not sit to dinner with the family. His Grace does not receive. You will read to the Dowager Duchess in the yellow drawing-room, and if you should meet him in a passage, you will lower your eyes and let him pass, for he does not care to be looked at, and he has a temper like the weather off the sea. I waited for the girl to shrink. They all shrank. 3 companions in 18 months had come to Greystone and gone again, and each of them had learned within a fortnight to press herself against the wainscot when I came near, as though my ruin might be catching. But this one only said, in a voice as level as a laid table, "I shall try not to stare, Mrs. Pryor. I find people generally prefer it." And she came on up the stair, and I stepped back into the dark before the candle could find me, and I did not know yet what I had heard. I only knew that something in the flat, unbothered plainness of her had struck me like a stone dropped into a still cistern, and the rings of it went on spreading long after her step had died away. Her name was Miss Eleanor Finch. She was a clergyman's daughter from a parish 2 counties south, and her father had died owing more than his living was worth, and so she had come north in a hired coach in the last week of November to earn her bread reading novels and scripture to an old woman who could no longer see the print. She was not beautiful in the way the drawing-rooms of London prized. She was tall and quiet and brown-haired, with a wide plain forehead and a steady gray gaze, and a mouth that looked as though it had learned long ago to keep its own counsel. She wore a gray stuff gown turned twice at the cuffs, and a shawl that had been good once. She had nothing in the world but her wits and her dignity, and she held to both the way a drowning man holds to a spar. I was the Duke of Greystone. They called me the War Duke in the villages, and they crossed to the far side of the lane when my horse came through. I had gone out to Spain a whole man, and I had come home 3 years later with the left side of my face burned to a ridge of scarred flesh from cheekbone to jaw, and my right hand, my shooting hand, the hand that had once been the surest in the regiment, broken and healed crooked, the 2 smallest fingers curled and dead, so that I could no longer hold a pen without it wandering, nor a wineglass without watching it, nor a rifle at all. I had come home to a house I had not wanted, and a title I had not earned, and a grandmother who would not let me rot the way I meant to. And I had shut the great doors of Greystone against the county, and told myself that was mercy, that a man they could not bear to look on had no business asking them to look. I had grown very good at not being seen. That was the truth I lived by in those first years home. If they could not see me, they could not flinch, and if they could not flinch, I need not watch the flinch happen and know again what I was. Miss Finch undid all of that. She did not mean to. That was the wonder of it. She simply would not play the part. The first time she looked at me full in the face was in the library, 4 days after she came. It was past midnight. I did not sleep in those years, or I slept and woke with the sound of the guns in my ears and could not go back, and so I walked. The library was mine at that hour always, and I had gone down in shirt sleeves with a branch of candles to find a book I did not want, only for the walking of it, and I came round the great oak press, and there she was, curled in the window seat with a shawl about her and a single candle guttering, and a volume open on her knee. She should have screamed. The last companion had screamed, once meeting me so, and I had carried the sound of it about with me for a week. Miss Finch looked up. Her eyes went across my face, the whole of it, the good side and the ruin, unhurried, the way one reads a difficult line twice to be sure of it, and then she closed her book on her finger to keep the place and said, "I could not sleep, Your Grace. The house is very quiet up here. I hope I have not taken a book you wanted." I stood there in the candlelight like a fool, my ruined hand curled behind my back out of an old habit of hiding, and I could not for a moment find any words at all. I had braced for the flinch. I had braced the way a man braces for a blow he has taken 100 times and knows the shape of. And it did not come, and having no blow to meet, I did not know what to do with myself. "You have taken nothing," I said at last. My voice came out rougher than I meant. "Read what you like, no one else does." "That seems a pity," she said, "for so many books." And she looked down and went on reading, as though a scarred and sleepless duke were the most ordinary furniture of the room. And after a moment I took my unwanted book from the shelf and went away, and I stood a long time on the cold stair with my heart going hard and strange in my chest, trying to understand what had happened to me. It was this: she had looked at me and she had not looked away. I did not know then how rare a thing that was, or how much of a man's soul can live or die on it. I only knew that I went back to the library the next night, and she was there again, and the night after that, and by the end of the first week it had become a thing we did not speak of and did not name, the two of us. The fire built up small, the candles, the long quiet, a whole silent country of our own carved out of the sleepless hours while the great house slept around us and the wind came off the fells and beat at the shutters like something that wanted in. My grandmother saw it before I did. My grandmother saw most things. The Dowager Duchess of Greystone was near 80 then, and near blind and sharp as a paring knife to the last. She had buried a husband and a son, and had no intention of burying her spirit before her body caught up, and she ran the household from her chair by the drawing-room fire with a stick she used more for emphasis than for walking. She had loved me stubbornly and without softness all my life, and when I came home ruined she had looked at me one long moment and then said only, "Well, you are still too tall for the door lintels. Duck your head, Alaric, and stop looming," and had never once in 3 years spoken to me as though I were broken. It was she who had hired Miss Finch, and it was she who first said the thing aloud. "She does not fear you," my grandmother told me one gray afternoon, having sent the girl off to fetch a book. "Have you noticed? She reads to me of an evening, and when you come to the door, oh, you think I do not know you come to the door and hover in it like a great awkward crow, but I know she does not lose her place. Every other creature in this house drops a stitch when you appear. She does not. She marks where the girl in the story has got to and reads on, and when you have gone she never mentions it. I have watched." She turned her clouded eyes toward me with unnerving accuracy. "That is a rare thing in a woman, Alaric. To be unafraid, rarer than beauty. Beauty I have known to curdle a soul, courage never did." "She is a servant, grandmother," I said, more sharply than I felt. "She is paid not to fear me." "She is paid to read Mrs. Radcliffe to a blind old woman," said the Dowager, unmoved. "There is no sum in the world would pay a frightened creature to sit as easy as that girl sits. You cannot buy it. You have either got the thing in you or you have not. She thumped her stick once, gently, on the hearthstone. She has got it. Mind you do not frighten it out of her by being a fool." I told myself she was an old woman weaving stories, as the old will, but I went on going to the door of the drawing-room in the evenings, and hovering in it like a great awkward crow, and I found that my grandmother had told the truth. Miss Finch did not lose her place. She read on in that low, even, unhurried voice, and the firelight moved on her plain face, and now and then, at a turn in the tale, the corner of her mouth would tuck in with private amusement. And once, only once in those first weeks, as she read some absurd swooning passage of Gothic terror, she glanced up over the top of the book and found me in the doorway and let me see the amusement, one flicker of it, shared, before she looked down and read on with perfect gravity. As though we two knew the book was ridiculous, and the old woman loved it, and there was no harm in the world in that. I carried that flicker about with me for days, the way I had carried the scream, but it did not weigh. It was the first thing in 3 years that did not weigh. I should tell you about the hand, because the hand is the heart of it, and I have been walking round it the way I walked round the truth for years. I had been the best shot in the regiment. I say it not from vanity, it is a plain fact, the way a man may be the tallest or the fastest, no credit to him, only a thing he was given. Out in Spain there had been a night the last night, when it fell to me to hold a broken wall while what was left of the company got clear, and there was a boy with me, Lieutenant Thomas Marrow, though I never called him lieutenant. I called him Tom, everyone called him Tom. He was 20 and laughed like a dropped tray of glasses, and could not hold his liquor, and loved a girl in Yorkshire he wrote to every week. Tom was the second best shot in the regiment, and he stayed with me at the wall when I ordered him to go, because he would not leave me, the young fool, and when the shell came it took the wall and it took my face and my hand and it took Tom altogether, and there was nothing of him after but the letter to the girl in Yorkshire, unfinished, in his breast, which I carried out through 3 miles of dark with my ruined hand held against my body like a broken wing, and which I never sent. Because I could not think what in God's name a man might write to a girl to tell her that her Tom had died holding a wall he had been ordered to leave, and that the man beside him had lived. That was the ghost I brought home, not the face. The face was only what people saw. The ghost was Tom and the letter and the thing I could not answer. Why him and not me, when I had ordered him away and he had disobeyed me out of love, and love had killed him? And I was the Duke now with a great house and a title and 80 rooms, and he was a name on a wall in Spain. I told no one. Grandmother knew I carried something, but not its shape. I kept the letter in the drawer of the library desk, and I did not read it and I did not burn it, and some nights I took it out and held it in my 2 hands, the good and the ruined, and could not do either thing. Miss Finch found me so, one night in the depth of January. I had not heard her come. I had the letter open on the desk before me and the branch of candles burning low, and I was not weeping. I had not wept in years. I had forgotten the trick of it. But I was somewhere past weeping in a gray country with no floor, and I did not know she was in the room until she said very quietly from just beside me, "Your Grace, your candle is guttering. May I bring you another?" I should have snarled. That was my armor in those days, to snarl, to send them running, to be the monster they expected so they need not be disappointed. I opened my mouth to snarl and I looked up, and she was standing there with her shawl about her and her plain gray eyes on me, not on the ruined side of my face, not on the crooked hand, but on me, on whatever was behind the ruin, on the gray country I was lost in, and the snarl died. "It is only an old letter," I said. My voice was not steady. I heard it and could not steady it. "Nothing that need trouble you." "It troubles you," she said. Not a question. She set down the fresh candle she had brought, and she did not sit and she did not touch me, only stood there, a plain, quiet presence in the dark, and she said, "My father was a clergyman, Your Grace. I have sat with a great many people beside a great many things they could not carry alone. I have found it is not the words that help. It is only that someone stays." She was silent a moment. "I will stay if you wish it, or I will go if you wish that. But I will not run, and I will not pretend I did not see, and I will not tell you it was nothing when your face says it is everything." No one had offered me that. In 3 years, no one. They had offered me pity, which I loathed, and false cheer, which I loathed more, and a wide, averted berth, which I had thought I wanted. No one had simply offered to stay. I told her about Tom. I had not meant to. It came out of me in the dark like water out of a cracked jar, all of it. The wall and the order and his laugh and the letter and the girl in Yorkshire. And the question with no answer under all of it, why him? Why not me? And she stood and she stayed. And when I was done she did not tell me it was not my fault, which would have been a lie and I would have hated her for it. And she did not tell me it was God's will, which I could not then have borne. She said only, after a long silence, "He did not stay for the wall, Your Grace. He stayed for you. You must not turn his love into your crime. It would grieve him past bearing, I think, to know his last act had become the thing you flog yourself with. He gave you your life. It is a discourtesy to the dead to refuse a gift." I had no answer for that. I have thought of it every day of my life since. She let me sit with it. Then she said gently, "The letter to the girl, you never sent it." I could not think what to write. Then let me help you write it, said Miss Finch. Not to spare yourself for her. She has waited 3 years for a letter that will not come, and no letter is a crueler thing than a hard one. She deserves to know he was loved and brave, and that he did not die alone or afraid. You can give her that. Your hand, she said it plainly, without flinching from the word. Your hand will not shape the letters easily. I have seen you try to write and give it up. So I will hold the pen, and you will say the words, and between us it will be done, and one small unbearable thing in the world will be finished. And so we did. That night, and into the gray of morning, at the library desk with the candles burned to stubs, I said the words, and Miss Eleanor Finch wrote them in her small clear hand. And I told a girl in Yorkshire I had never met that her Tom had been the best of us, and the bravest, and that he had died in an act of pure and stubborn love, and that a man he had saved would carry his memory with honor to the end of his days. And when it was written and folded and sealed, and I set it aside to go by the morning post at last, something in me that had been held clenched for 3 years let go, all at once, and I put my ruined hand over my eyes, and I wept at last like a boy, and Miss Finch did not look away and did not fuss and did not flee. She stayed. She had said she would stay, and she stayed, and that, I think, is the hour I began to love her, though I was a great while yet admitting it even to myself. The county, of course, had opinions. Word gets about in the north, however high the walls. It got about that the War Duke had taken to walking of a night with the Dowager's plain companion, that they read together in the library, that the monster of Greystone had grown almost tame. And where there is a duke, however ruined, with a great estate and no wife and no direct heir, there are always those who take an interest in his tameness, and those who take an interest in his not marrying at all. Chief among the latter was my cousin, Mr. Rupert Ashford. Rupert was the heir presumptive to Greystone. If I died without a son, the whole of it came to him, the house, the lands, the title, the 80 rooms, and Rupert had never in his life troubled to hide that he thought this arrangement only just, and my continued breathing a species of inconvenience. He was a smooth, handsome, well-fed man of the sort that does very well in drawing rooms and never once in a trench, and he had spent the war in London complaining of the price of things, and he looked on my scars with a fastidious distaste he was at no great pains to conceal. He came to Greystone twice a year to remind me, in the guise of family feeling, that a man in my condition ought really to be thinking of the succession, by which he meant that he hoped I would not, and would oblige everyone by dying quietly and leaving the succession to him. He came that February with his particular friend, Lady Cordelia Ashe, a fine, cold, celebrated beauty of the London seasons, all diamonds and disdain, and it was at the one dinner I could not decently refuse to attend, my own table in my own house, that the thing came to its head. I had not sat to dinner in 3 years. I sat that night because my grandmother commanded it, thumping her stick, telling me I would not skulk in my own dining room like a servant in disgrace, while that greasy cousin of mine carved my beef and eyed my chairs. And Miss Finch was there, at the foot of the table, near the Dowager, in her one good gown, because the Dowager would have her companion by her and would hear no argument. Lady Cordelia looked at my face across the candlelight for the whole of the first remove, the way one looks at an accident in the road, unable to look away, and repelled by the looking. And over the fish she said, in the carrying, careless drawl of her kind, to Rupert, but meant for the table, "I confess I do not know how you bear the country, Mr. Ashford. So very dull, and so very—" her eyes came to my ruined cheek and slid off it, delicately as from something unclean, confining. One is quite shut in with whatever one finds here. It was a small cruelty. They generally are. It was the flinch made into a sentence, and I had schooled myself for years to receive such things without reaction, to let them break on the stone of me and run off, and I sat there and let it, my ruined hand curled out of sight in my lap, my face a mask, and I thought, this is what I am for the world, and it was very cold in me. And Miss Finch set down her fork. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. She said, into the little frozen silence with perfect composure, "How curious, Lady Cordelia. I have found the country the very opposite of confining. In town, I am told, one may pass a whole season among 1,000 people and never once meet a soul with the courage to be plain, or the grace to be kind, or the character that is earned only by having borne something. Whereas here," and she looked quite deliberately, not away from me but at me, full at the ruined side of my face, and let the whole table see her do it, and she did not flinch, and her plain gray eyes were warm. "Here one finds men who have paid for their country in their own flesh and borne it without complaint and asked nothing back. I find that the reverse of dull, Lady Cordelia. I find it the only thing in the room worth looking at." The silence after that was absolute. Lady Cordelia's lovely face went first white and then a mottled red. Rupert set down his glass. My grandmother, at the head of the table, made a small sound that in a less dignified woman would have been a cackle, and covered it, imperfectly, with her napkin. And I sat there, the War Duke, the monster of Greystone, and I looked down the length of my own table at a plain clergyman's daughter in a twice-turned gown who had just defended me before the fashion of 2 counties without a tremor in her voice, and I felt something crack open in the frozen center of me and let in light. And I knew then, all at once and past all denying, that I loved her, and had loved her since the letter, and that whatever happened to me after, I would not be able to unknow it. Rupert knew it too, that was the trouble. Rupert saw my face in that moment. I could not school it. For once, I had no armor left for what I felt. And Rupert, who was many things but not a fool, saw the whole of it, the love and the light and the danger to his inheritance. And I watched him do a sum behind his handsome eyes, and I watched him not like the answer. He moved against me within the month. He did it cleverly, and he did it in the language of concern, which is the language such men always use to do their cruelties in. He went among the county with a grave and troubled face, and he spoke of his poor cousin the Duke, so terribly altered by the war, so very changed, and he wondered aloud, to magistrates and physicians and anyone of weight who would listen, whether a man so haunted, so solitary, so plainly unwell in his nerves, so given to walking the house at all hours and weeping over old letters, for the servants talked, and Rupert paid them to talk, whether such a man was truly competent to manage a great estate, or whether the kind and Christian thing, the family thing, would not be to see him gently relieved of the burden. And he wondered too, more quietly, whether it were not a scandal and a shame that this poor broken Duke had fallen under the influence of a scheming companion, a penniless clergyman's daughter with an eye to the main chance, who had wormed her way into his confidence, and would, if not checked, have the ruin of him and of the whole noble line of Greystone. I heard of it as one does, and I understood coldly what he intended. He would have me examined by physicians in his pay and declared unfit, melancholic, deranged, unequal to my affairs, and he would have the management of the estate put into his own hands as heir, and he would have Miss Finch turned out of the house as a designing adventuress before she could do him the inconvenience of becoming my wife and giving me a son. He had it all laid out, and the worst of it, the thing that stopped my breath, was that he might well succeed, for I had given him the weapons myself. I had shut myself away. I had refused the county. I had walked the nights and wept over letters and been, by every outward sign, exactly the broken recluse he described. I had built my own case against myself, brick by brick, for 3 years in the name of mercy, and now a man who hated me stood ready to read it back to a magistrate. And Miss Finch, who had done nothing but be kind and brave and true, was to be branded a schemer and cast out into the winter roads without a character, all for the crime of not flinching from me. I might have fought it with lawyers. I had the money. I could have out-lawyered Rupert to the gates of doom. But that is not how I chose to fight it, and I will tell you why, because it is the whole of what she taught me. I could not clear myself of the charge of being a broken recluse by hiding in my library and sending clerks to argue on my behalf. That would only prove the charge. There was only one way to answer a county that had been told I was a ruined shadow of a man, and that was to walk out into the middle of that county in my own scarred face and let them see, with their own eyes, that I was not. I had spent 3 years believing that to be seen was to be pitied, and to be pitied was to die a little. Miss Finch had shown me, without ever once saying so, that there is another thing a man may be when he is seen. He may be known, and a man who is known cannot be so easily lied about. So I did the thing I had sworn I would never do. I opened the doors of Greystone. I gave a ball, the first at Greystone in a generation. I invited the whole of the county, every magistrate Rupert had whispered to, every physician, every fine cold lady who had looked at me sidelong in the road. I stood at the head of my own great staircase in my own great house, in my regimentals with the scars plain in the blaze of 1,000 candles, and I received them, every one, and I did not curl my hand behind my back, and I did not turn the good side of my face, and I let them look. I let them all look. I gave them my ruin full and unashamed, and I found, as she had known I would find, as she had been telling me all along in that low, even voice, that when a man ceases to hide his wound, the wound ceases to be the thing that damns him. It becomes only a part of him. A scar is a story of survival. Only in the dark does it look like a monster. And I danced. God help me, I who had not danced in a decade. I opened the ball. I crossed the whole length of that blazing floor before the assembled fashion of 2 counties, and I went to the foot of the room where a plain woman in a gray gown stood beside my grandmother's chair, expecting nothing, asking nothing, as she had always asked nothing, and I bowed to her, the War Duke of Greystone, bowing before the whole county to a penniless clergyman's daughter, and I held out my ruined right hand, the crooked hand, the dead-fingered hand, the hand I had hidden for 3 years, and I said, so that all of them could hear it, "Miss Finch, will you do me the very great honor?" She looked at the hand. She looked at me, and her plain gray eyes filled, the only time I ever saw them do it, and she did not take the good hand that any other woman would have reached for. She took the ruined one. She laid her fingers over the crooked, dead, scarred thing I had hidden from the world, and she held it as though it were the most precious object in England, and she said, clear enough for the county to hear, "The honor is mine, your grace. It always was." And we danced. Badly, I dare say, for I was long out of practice and my hand could not hold hers as it ought, but she held mine, and steadied it, the way she had steadied everything in me, and the county watched the monster of Greystone dance with the one soul who had never feared him, and I promise you no one that night was thinking of Rupert Ashford's careful whispers. You cannot call a man broken while he waltzes at his own ball with light in his face. Rupert's whole case fell to pieces in the space of a country dance, and he knew it, and he left before supper, and Lady Cordelia left with him, and I never after that had the smallest trouble from either of them, for the county had seen the truth with its own eyes, and the truth is a very hard thing to unsay. But that is not the end. That is only the winning of the field. The end is quieter, and it is the part I keep. It was very late, when the last carriage had rolled away down the frozen drive, and the candles were guttering, and my grandmother had been helped to bed triumphant. I found Miss Finch in the library, of course in the library. Where else? Standing at the tall window with her shawl about her, looking out at the walled garden white under a hard, clean moon. And I came and stood beside her, and for a while neither of us spoke, in the old easy silence that had been ours since the first week. Then I said, "Rupert meant to have you turned out. As a schemer, did you know?" "I knew," she said. "Servants talk. I had begun to pack my box." She said it without self-pity, as she said everything, a plain fact laid on the table. "I thought it best to go before I was sent. I did not wish to be a weapon he could use against you." "You were going to leave," I said. Something turned over in me cold at how nearly I had lost her and never known. Without a word. "I am a companion, your grace," she said, and there was, for the first time, the smallest tremor in the level voice. A paid companion, with no fortune and no family and no claim on anyone. It is not my place to make scenes over my own departure. I would have read to your grandmother in the morning and gone in the afternoon and been nothing but a name you half remembered by summer. That is what women like me are. We are the plain gowns at the foot of the table. We are not the ones who are kept. And I understood then that she had been braver than I had ever guessed, that all the while she had been fearless before my ruin and steady before the county's scorn. She had believed herself, in her own plain heart, to be the sort of woman no one keeps, that her courage had cost her something. That she had loved me, for she had, I knew it now, with no more hope of being loved back than a servant has of being adored by the house she serves, and had meant to walk away into the winter and never say so, sooner than be a burden or a scandal to me. I could not have that. I would sooner have died than have that. I took her hand, the ruined right one to her right one, so that she could feel the crooked fingers and know exactly what she was being offered and by whom. And I turned her from the window to face me, and I made her look at me, the way she had always made me able to be looked at, and I said, "Eleanor, you are wrong about only one thing in the world, and it is this. You are not the plain gown at the foot of the table. You are the only person in this whole cold house who ever saw me, not my scars, not my title, not my ruin, me. You did not run when everyone runs. You did not flinch when everyone flinches. You gave me back my own life when I had thrown it away, and you wrote a letter to a girl in Yorkshire that saved my soul, and tonight you took my broken hand before the whole of 2 counties as though it were a thing worth having." My own voice broke. I let it. I had learned from her that a man need not hide the breaking. I am not asking you to stay as a companion. I am asking you to stay as my wife. To be the Duchess of Greystone, if you can bear the word, or only to be Eleanor, and let me be Alaric, and let us grow old in this draughty barn of a house, and read all its foolish books to each other by the fire, until we are both too blind to see the print and must remember them by heart. I am asking you to be kept, Eleanor, by me, for all my days, because there is no one else on this earth I could bear to be seen by, and no one else I would want to be. She was crying, then, the second time and the last I ever saw her weep, and she was laughing at the same time at herself, at the both of us, and she pressed my ruined hand between her 2 plain warm ones and held it against her heart, and she said, "You great foolish brooding crow of a man, I would have gone. I would truly have gone and spent the whole rest of my life reading to other people's grandmothers and thinking of you." She shook her head. "Yes, of course, yes. 1,000 times yes. I never wanted keeping in my life until I wanted you. We were married in the spring, in the small stone church in the village, with the whole county come to see it, and my grandmother in the front pew with her stick, weeping and pretending not to, and the walled garden white no longer but wild with the first green of the year. I sent the letter to the girl in Yorkshire, and had a kind reply from her in time, and Tom's ghost, when I thought of him after, no longer stood at the wall in the dark but sat somewhere in the warm, laughing his drop-tray laugh, glad, I have always chosen to believe, that the man he saved had at last done something worth the saving with the life he gave. I am an old man now, writing this in the same library at the same desk. My hand is no steadier than it was. My wife holds the pen still, when it matters, as she has held every broken thing in me for 40 years. The county long ago forgot to call me the War Duke. They call me only Greystone now, and they come to my table, and their children are unafraid of my face, having grown up with it, and think nothing of it at all, which is the greatest gift the world can give a scarred man, to become, at last, ordinary. I owe all of it to a plain woman in a gray gown who came north in a hired coach one November, and would not, whatever they told her I was, look away. They warned her the War Duke was a monster. She read to me by the fire and never once looked away, and in the reading she made me, slowly and without ever seeming to try, into a man.